Hi, I'm Cheryl Belson with American Sewing Guild, and today I have the pleasure of spending time with Susie Fur. Susie is the founder and director of the Bay Area fashion design school called Apparel Arts. Her school has been home to hundreds of fashion designers in the apparel and costuming industry. She teaches classes on pattern making, textiles, sewing, design principles, and tailoring. She also directs a team of instructors for the Apparel Arts 2-year program. And in addition to teaching at her own school, Susie also teaches and speaks at conferences and guilds and schools around the country. And she teaches online at Blueprint. And if that's not enough teaching, she has also taught classes for big name companies like Gap, Pixar, and Lucasfilms. And the list is not done yet because Susie is also the author of a book called Building Patterns, The Architecture of Women's Clothing. Wow, I am tired just reading that introduction, Susie. Welcome and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, I am so looking forward to hearing more about your story and your school. So let's just dive right in. I'm not going to lie, I am really intrigued with what you do with these large companies. And I want to go there before we're done. But I always love to hear the story that people have to tell about how they got where they are. So I understand that you started as, I think it was a knitwear designer and a pattern maker. And from that to today, you have your own fashion design school. So fill in some gaps about that journey that you've made.
Oh, so it was a long journey. I started as a knitwear designer working on knitting machines and making sweaters. And admittedly, I did not know what I was doing. I was kind of playing around with making sweaters, and I wore one into a store just to go shopping, and the shop owner said, "Oh, that's so great, I love that, can you make some for our store?" I'm like, "Sure." So that's how it started. So I started working for the store making their knitwear, and I loved it. It was so fun. My stuff was selling. I just felt like I figured out what I want to do with myself. And so I decided to go to school for it. I thought, well, I'm totally winging it. I know there's more to learn here. So I went to school 2 places. I went to the Academy of Fashion, which was in San Francisco. It's not there anymore. This is back in the 80s. Academy of Fashion. And that was kind of more of a commercial school, commercial design. And then I studied with the woman, Simone, at the same time, who studied in Paris in the 50s, I believe, moved to San Francisco in the 70s and opened up her studio to teach. So hers was more dressmaking and private client. So it was a great education in marrying the very commercial type of fashion with they doing, maybe weddings or private clients and really specialty things like that. So
I have to tell you, the reason I just sat forward so much with such interest is I did an interview with Kenneth King in Boston back this past summer at the American Sewing Guild conference. And he talked about his training with Simone. So when you said this, I'm like, this Simone person is showing up again. That's really interesting.
Yeah, she in the Bay Area, San Francisco. She was the one to go to. I even think like Marcy Tilton took some classes from her. I mean, she really was a fixture. I believe she's still alive too, well into her 90s. So yeah, Kenneth, we overlapped. I think I was finishing when he started. We had a brief overlap, and Simone loved Kenneth because Kenneth is so lovable, and Kenneth was Simone's everything. So it was a great education. So I did that for a couple of years, and after that, I worked as a freelance pattern maker, and I did some design of my own, but I really found out that I really liked the pattern making process, and I liked the sewing process and the figuring out the fabric process. I liked all the processes that went into design, after it was designed. So I worked as a freelance pattern maker. And then something else that was just kind of fell in my lap, which was such a good education looking back on it. I worked for boutiques who wanted to put their own line of clothing in their stores. So they would say, here's some sketches. This is what we want: menswear, traditional women's wear. Here are our sketches. So I would do the patterns, source the fabric, source the factories, or if it was a small run, I would have it done in my little sewing studio. And then we would put the labels for the store and put it back in the store and to sell. So that was just phenomenal in having these small little capsule collections of maybe like 6 to 8 pieces where I could do virtually every part of it and have my hands on everything and really learn how all the pieces fit together, from concept to putting it on the floor of the store and pricing it out and all of that. It was so good. It was such a good education to do that project for a few years for a few different stores. So I did that. But mostly it was my freelance pattern making that was making me happy and paying the bills. And then I taught a class for Marcy at Sewing Workshop, but it might have been Linda Lee when she had it by then. I can't remember. And I taught some pattern making classes there. And from there, they were just quick overviews, 4 weeks on making a skirt sloper or something like that, or a moulage, a bodice. And one of the students said, hey, this is great, but I really want to learn more about this. Can you teach me? And I was like, I'm kind of busy, got a lot going on, not interested. And she just kept after me for like a solid year. And so I was like, fine. She really wore me down. So I said, come to my studio, I'll teach you this. And then, can I bring a friend and a friend? And after a year, I had so many people in my studio on Mondays and Wednesday nights that I thought, there's something here and it's fun and I like it. So I started creating a curriculum around it. We started with the pattern making, then I brought in a friend who's a good illustrator to teach illustration. And then I added some textiles and some construction. So after about 4 years of doing that in a very informal way, I made it into a program. So that was in 1996. Starting around 2000, we really had a dedicated program with different instructors, including myself, to teach this. It kind of varied between an 8 and 10 class 2-year program. And it's still going strong today, 24 years later.
That is fantastic. What a great story. And I always love hearing the stories of how people journeyed and bumped into this or bumped into that, and next thing you knew, there's so many stories that have that phrase, next thing you knew.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit more about the educational program that you offer at the Apparel Arts. And you have a 1-minute video on your website that gives us a little glimpse into what it might look like to study with you. So I'd like to show it now. So let's take a look.
Great.
So that gave us just a little glimpse, and what I would love for you to do is just tell us a little bit about the kind of students, so the people that we saw in the video, what kind of student does your program target, and what might they achieve from attending your school?
Well, you can approach the program in 3 different ways. So we have our certificate program, which is very well respected in the area. Lots of students take that, move on to working at Gap and Levi's. So we have a professional track, and that's our main certificate program. Right now it's 8 classes that are pattern making, draping, textiles, design principles, illustration, manufacturing practices, classes like that, to give you a really well-rounded idea of what it's like to work in the industry, what's the language of the industry, so you can hit the ground running on your first day on the job. Then we have another way to approach it is just to take one-off classes. So maybe there's somebody who's working in the industry and they just need a textiles class, or they want a draping class, or a part of the pattern making, but not the whole thing. So they can jump in and just pick and choose what helps them achieve their goals, be it professional or personal. And then the third approach is to just take our sewing classes. So if you want to become a better sewist, you're doing our construction classes. We have advanced construction classes like how to sew leather, or faux leather, how to sew denim, how to sew bias, how to sew chiffon, velvet, things like that. Then we have classes on tailoring and serging. So those classes would support somebody who really just wants to improve their sewing, be a better sewist. So you can really kind of work the program however you want to reach your goals. We don't have a long-term contract, so students come in, they tell us what they want, and that can change. Somebody might come in and say, you know what, I really just need to take this textile class. 2 years later, they've gone through the whole thing. So we keep it really flexible. It's rare for us to get like the 18-year-old right out of high school. Usually it's people who work in the industry already, they have a degree in something else, or they're returning to fashion. They put aside their dreams of fashion for 30, 40 years. Now they want to come back and touch on those dreams again. So we really let people create their own curriculum and take the classes they want to reach their goals. So we're super flexible.
Oh, that sounds like a great program. Well, and as I mentioned to you before this interview, Penny Hanstein, one of our local Plano American Sewing Guild members, has traveled to the Bay Area for a number of, and I think what she's taken is called pattern making intensive courses. Okay. And Penny, I know Penny, and I know that when she went, she's fairly advanced in her sewing skills already. She's quite amazing in some of the things that she does. And yet I've heard her say on numerous occasions about her experience from going to your pattern making intensives, that studying pattern making with you took her construction skills to a completely different level. And I'd be interested in hearing you talk about the relationship between pattern making skills and construction skills. I've got a couple of pictures from Penny, so as I'll put those on the screen, so as you talk about it, you might be able to kind of refer to those and help us see the connection.
Sure, yeah. So first of all, Penny is one of the best sewists I have ever encountered. She is very talented. So when she came to me, really, the sewing part, I didn't have much to teach her, though we went back and forth on a few things there. It was really the pattern making for her, and she did the intensives. This is one of her mock-ups that she did. The pattern making, she had worked mostly with commercial patterns and really very good at adjusting them. But I think having her come to the intensives gave her a much deeper understanding of pattern making. For instance, what we're looking at here, this blouse, is a double collar blouse. With the way the intensives were set up, it was in modules. Like you learn moulage, making the bodice. You learned sleeves. You learned collars. You learned how to do princess seams. So you learned how to do button plackets, things like that. Everything's broken down into modules. So this blouse that we're looking at here came from doing the bodice intensive, the sleeve intensive, the collar intensive, the lines intensive, which is seam lines and silhouettes. So with Penny, I think getting a handle on the pattern making from scratch gave her a better understanding of how things go together, how garments are sewn together. We've all made that mistake where you're sewing and you're like, I did this when I should have done this before I did that. You get out the seam ripper, and you go back and do the step and then re-sew that area. So I think, or I know, when you know pattern making, you can see 5 steps ahead. So it speeds up your pattern making, and it's a funny thing. You can visualize. You're working on one task, but your mind is 5 steps ahead. And I think that's what knowing pattern making does for sewists, and how it makes their sewing better and more professional looking, because they're not double backing up on anything to redo anything. It all flows. You know where to start. You don't even need to read the directions on the patterns. You know what you need to do because you understand that pattern and you understand how it all needs to come together. So yeah, I feel like if you know pattern making, your sewing is just up to 50%. You're just at a different level because you can just picture how this thing is coming together in your mind.
Wow. Now, Penny sent me another picture.
Let's take a look.
She sent me this kind of collage of, I think, from a separate intensive.
Mm-hmm. So it looks like she has her sleeve pattern up there in the corner with the curve and the pencils there. So, what we also teach in the intensives too, or in our pattern making classes, is like paying attention to that grain line. Which grain line are you going to use? They all have different implications. Putting in those notches, putting in those all punches, how to mark your patterns, how much seam allowance do you need where it's not too much where it gets bulky, or too little where you don't have enough to work with. So I see her pattern up there. There's the other corner, upper corner, we see her jacket muslin, making a muslin, working out your details. Looks like she has maybe a fabric swatch on that shoulder to kind of get a look of, see how the fabric would work. And then of course in the middle is the finished garment, stunning. And then the bottom corners there's the lining, and then we have some sleeve detail there. I mean, I can only take so much credit for the pattern making. It's like Penny's sewing is just so phenomenal. She's just really, really good. And what makes a good sewer that or sewist that Penny has is she knows when it's not good enough. And then she knows when to move on. She knows when it is good enough. I was taught something, and I want to credit Madeleine Vionnet. She did not tell me this personally, of course, but I have heard that, I believe it was her who was saying she was such a perfectionist that Madeleine Vionnet had to give herself 4% on every garment that she made that she could be unsatisfied with. So in order for her to move to the next thing, she had to give herself this 4% to say, it's 96% there. I'm moving on to the next project, which I always love, because you know how critical we can be of our own garments, and then you put them in the closet for 6 weeks and you pull them out and you're like, this is amazing, So
we have a joke that we often say in some of our meetings that if you can't see it from the back of a galloping horse, maybe you should move on.
Right. There's your 4%. We all have it.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is beautiful. And Penny was just a delight to have in the studio. Just beautiful.
Well, it definitely sounds like your pattern making intensives just are chock full of all kinds of great information that not only teach you how to make patterns, but also I can hear in your description, they can advance and refine your construction skills because you can think ahead like you described. Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. So, all right. So now I've waited all I can wait. I'm dying to hear about these teaching gigs that you have with Gap and Pixar and Lucasfilms. What does that look like? What do you do for them?
Well, all those are local companies to the Bay Area. And it started really, the first one I did was with Lucasfilm, and that was a neighbor of mine who worked at Lucasfilm at the time. And he was in editing, I believe, but he was hearing that the they call them tailors, the ones who dress the computer generated characters, the CG characters, that they were having a hard time figuring out how fabric lays on a body, where a shirt might wrinkle in the armhole, or when you move, how does the fabric behave when it's sewn into a garment, and also how you move. So I did similar classes for Lucasfilm and Pixar on textiles, and this is a rayon, this is what it's all about, this is how drapey it is, this is a velvet, and this is how you're going to get the light reflection when you turn it this way or that. So kind of a similar class for both of them. And I think Pixar found me from Lucas, maybe. And that was a few years apart. So the Lucasfilm thing was first, and that was great to go into their studios and teach there. It was just so exciting. And then Pixar, for Pixar, I did the textiles class for the CG characters, and then they wanted to do some sewing classes for their tailors as well. So their tailors, the ones who draw the costumes, they could come in and sew. We sewed a button-down shirt, with all the whistles and bells, so they could kind of get an idea. And we also patterned it. They patterned it. We took measurements. They did slopers, then we patterned the shirt, and then they sewed a shirt. And they were really good. It was really such an exciting class. It was so fun. They were so into it. So I did that for Pixar. And then Gap was something different. And we're still working with Gap now, doing they do new hires. So they get like college grads who come in and they're on the management track. So these groups of students, we've done anywhere from like 14, 15 to like 27, 30 students. They come to Apparel Arts for 7 days, and every day is a different topic. So, and it's very hands-on. They pattern draft. They learn about textiles. They drape a garment on a dress form. They sew up a project. We do things on trend analysis, and they get into groups and talk about what they saw on their commute into Apparel Arts that day. What trends are they seeing? We talk a lot about diversity. We put them in different groups where they have to come up with a plan to be more inclusive to women over 50, people of color. What is the shopping experience for these groups? People with disabilities. There's several different groups that we touch on, and you really have to face the shopping challenges and successes for these groups and how to be more inclusive. And then they have to design a line for one of those chosen groups that they present at the end. It's so fun. And these students at Gap, they're not sewers, they're not designers, they're in management, and they're maybe in working with data or working with the finances or something like that. But it gives them a solid week, 9 to 5, 7 days, where they are immersed in how products are made. And that way they have a better understanding of their job going forward. So that's been really, really fun. We've done several groups of that, and they found me just locally. And a lot of our students have graduated and worked at Gap or Levi's, so we're kind of known in the Bay Area. They had this program in place for many years, and they were working with FIDM, Fashion Institute, and Fashion Institute couldn't do it anymore for some reason I'm not familiar with. And so then they approached me and Apparel Arts, and we're like, yeah, this sounds so fun. So a couple times a year, we just shut it down and just bring in the Gap people to walk them through. So it's fun. It's good. And it's good to kind of change gears and be around a group of non-sewers and non-designers where you have to relearn how to explain it to a group, that where it's really not necessarily their interest, but by the end, kind of is, and they understand their industry better. So it's fun.
That sounds fascinating. It really does. And I'm fascinated by all of it. I'm fascinated by the fact that the animation world has to study the real world. I know this is not rocket science. It should just you should just think this way. But if they want to make their animated characters look more realistic, they've got to study the real world. So the real world of making clothing and putting clothing on a body. So that really is such a fascinating story. So,
yeah.
Well, also just, I feel like we have to wander all over the map to cover all of the things that you've been involved in. Let's shift our discussion and talk about your book. Your book's name is Building Patterns, The Architecture of Women's Clothing. So can you tell us a little bit about writing this book, how it came to be, and how someone might be able to use it as a resource?
So Building Patterns was first published in 2008. By that time, I had Apparel Arts for, I guess, 12 years. And up to that point, I was making the notes for each class. Okay, this is how you do a skirt with a yoke. This is how you make a notch collar, the drafting of it. And so I had this all in sections of notes that the students, were given when they would advance to the next section. And so early on, maybe like 2004 or something, I thought this really should be in book form. So I started writing it, and it did take several years to write it. It's very dense, the information in the book. And so I enjoyed the writing process. It was fun. Like my mind kind of works like that, to kind of, a little bit of a mathematical, progression to the instructions. So writing the book was great. It came out in 2008, and it still sells like crazy. We just got another shipment that came in, so it's in stock. So you can get the book, you can get Building Patterns on the Apparel Arts website, and it's also available as an ebook now, which I'm really excited about, and that is on Issuu, ISSUU.com. So Issuu.com has the ebook. They host the ebook, so that's worth checking out.
Awesome. That sounds great. I think that a lot of our audience will be interested in doing that. So
good.
Well, I always like to conclude these interviews with asking if you can give us a glimpse into what's next on the horizon for Susie Fur or Apparel Arts. What's looming in the future?
Well, during this time, we'll see. I mean, it's such a difficult time for everybody for different reasons. But I'm also kind of excited because I've been dragging my feet on the online classes. I know that's the next thing that I want to do. And I just love teaching in person, being in the studio and that whole energy. So I have not given the focus to the online like I have wanted to. But now with what's going on right now, it is top of mind to really figure that out and get going with that. So I would say the biggest project, hopefully by the end of the year, is online content through the Apparel Arts website. You can also check us out on Instagram. We're at apparelarts_oak, OAK. And so I'm starting to do tiny little quick textile hints on there. And I'm going to come up with some sewing things too. But so a little more interactive on Instagram, but then also the website really just fully going into the online classes. I think just given where we are and I think where we're going, that's going to be my next frontier.
I know that you will do a stellar job of it. It's clear that you've done a stellar job of in person, and it's just one step further. You've got this.
Thank you so much.
Well, and thank you, Susie, so much for talking with me today. It has been a true delight to spend time. I've learned so much just from our conversation, both during the interview and in the surrounding conversations that we've had. And we are definitely going to keep our eye on you and be watching for what's coming in the future. And I'm especially excited that what you have on the future horizon is some online classes that maybe more of us can take advantage of. So
thank you. Thank you so much.
And until next time, stay safe and stay healthy. And until we all get out of this COVID world.
I know, and same to your members. I hope everybody stays safe and healthy and we get through this stronger.
Yes, indeed.
With more sewing projects.
Absolutely.